When I first stirred awake that fateful night, the digital clock by my bedside glowed a ghostly green, showing 3:04 a.m. The dull hum of my apartment's heater accompanied the silence of the world outside, yet something felt distinctly off, as if another presence loomed in the air. I lay there, half aware and half dreaming, studying shadows that wavered along the cream-colored walls. It was in that moment, as I blinked away the grogginess from my eyes, that I caught a gentle, iridescent glow near the foot of my bed. At first, I presumed it to be a trick of the streetlight, or the faint glimmer of some forgotten electronic device left on my floor. But then, I saw the outline of a figure, slender limbs, delicate fingers clutching the bed frame, and skin that shimmered faintly with a hue I had never before witnessed in a human being. In a jolt of startled panic, my instincts seized me, and I sat up abruptly. My mind raced, half convinced I must still be asleep, yet the figure remained. She rose to a crouch, as if attempting to calm me, and I beheld a radiant, feminine face. Her large eyes reflected the disquiet I felt, though hers seemed laced with shame. For the space of a full breath, neither of us spoke, both of us overwhelmed by that bizarre sense of having discovered something unspeakably precious and equally perilous. Then, softly, she spoke in fluent English, as though she had practiced every syllable with tender care. "I am Zyra," she said, each consonant laced with an almost musical intonation. My heart thundered in my chest as questions piled at the tip of my tongue. Ethan Grayson, a somewhat reclusive geneticist who had spent countless nights poring over the mysteries of DNA, was never one to scare easily. Yet, in that moment, my resolve wavered. She continued, voice trembling slightly. "I can explain, if you permit." Stunned, I forced my mouth to form words. "Explain," I stammered. "Please do." She rose from the shadows with careful grace, her luminous blue skin catching the faint glow of my bedside lamp. She wore garments, though garments might be too strong a word for the draped cloth and oddly shaped, shimmering metal pieces that adorned her figure, unlike any earthly fashion. In her hands, she clutched a small device, all blinking lights and swirling patterns, its surface no larger than a deck of cards. She inhaled, looking ready to deliver a carefully rehearsed speech, and then began. "I come from a star system known to you, I believe, as the Telnaris region," she said, glancing about my cramped bedroom and the piles of scientific journals scattered across the floor. "I am, in my own world, what you might call an anthropologist, though I specialize in comparative species mating rituals." She paused, her luminous eyes flickering with both curiosity and anxiety. "Did not intend to intrude, but I had to observe human courtship and emotional bonding behaviors, for they are so unique in the galaxy." While her statement might have seemed ludicrous, I felt compelled by the earnestness of her voice and the sincerity shining in those wide eyes. I had read enough about biological anomalies and had performed enough borderline experiments at my lab to know the universe held more secrets than we could begin to fathom. Something in my intuition told me that, as extraordinary as it sounded, she was telling me the truth. "You," I managed, swallowing hard, "chose my bedroom as a vantage point for research? I wanted to say insane, but I bit my tongue. Instead, I rubbed at my bleary eyes and asked the question that burned in my mind. Why here? Why me? Her gaze darted to the device in her hand. I used a scanning technology to identify an individual with a significant aptitude for understanding genetic structures, as well as a, how shall I say, deficit in the realm of romance. A soft quiver tinted her lips. "You were selected, as your patterns of loneliness and repeated attempts at forming emotional connections were well documented through your, digital footprint." She looked apologetic. "I'm sorry if that's invasive, but I must complete my doctoral thesis on the intricacies of human romantic expression, and I thought you might help." Staggered, I sank back against my pillow, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "And so, you took it upon yourself to hide under my bed?" I asked, incredulous but oddly unafraid. The surreal nature of this encounter simmered in my consciousness. It was meant to be covert observation, but, clearly, I have been discovered. She pursed her lips. "Your environment was not as safe for me as I calculated. The bed was too low, the vantage angles poor, and your habits unpredictable. Her cheeks flushed a deeper shade of violet, reminiscent of a human blush. I should have been alarmed, outraged even, but something about her vulnerability, this otherworldly anthropologist who had chosen my quiet, unremarkable life to study, softened my disposition. A wave of practical thinking washed over me. "All right," I said, clearing my throat. "So, you're here on Earth to research romance, and you found me. Fine. But you must realize this is, well, we need a plan, because you can't just keep lurking under my bed." She nodded, suddenly serious, and a flicker of relief passed across her face. "Yes, I agree. That's why I meant to make my presence known properly, but the timing was poor." She directed her bright gaze at me. "Will you help me?" In that instant, my entire life seemed to pivot on a single decision. Every rational part of my brain told me to run, call the authorities, or do something more typical. But I had grown weary of typical, and my lonely nights had begun to blur together in endless repetition. I was, if nothing else, deeply curious, perhaps foolishly so. Besides, I had devoted my entire career to unraveling the hidden complexities of life's code. Finding an alien in my very bedroom gave me a glimpse of knowledge far beyond my wildest imaginings. "All right, Zyra," I said, and I reached out a tentative hand, heart still pounding. "I'll help you, but how?" She looked immensely gratified. "If you can teach me about human courtship, perhaps let me witness your social customs more directly, then I can gather sufficient data. My superiors do not know I've come this close to the subject. Typically, our anthropological guidelines forbid such direct interactions, but I believe the risk is worth the reward. I promise to keep my presence hidden, so as not to disrupt your daily life more than necessary." A short laugh escaped me. "Well, we'll have to discuss some ground rules," I said, thinking of the ethics involved, the potential ramifications of letting a secret alien linger in my apartment. It seemed insane, but a spark of excitement coursed through me, chasing away the loneliness that had so long haunted my nights. Yet, as that surge of resolution filled me, a piercing sound, like a surge of static snapping in the air, echoed through the stillness of my bedroom. Zyra went rigid. Her device began blinking in a frantic pattern. She shot a worried glance at me. "They found me," she whispered in horror. "Who?" I began, but she cut me off with a trembling hush. Scrambling to her feet, she pressed herself against the wall. She tapped several symbols on her alien scanner, the colors flashing a menacing red. I must go, or else they will," she faltered, eyes wide. "There are enforcers from my Homestar system who track unauthorized research. They aim to erase findings that violate certain interplanetary agreements. They must have detected my field manipulator's signals." My throat constricted, adrenaline pumping anew. "But," I said, my heart lurching, "what does that mean, erase your findings? Are you in danger?" She nodded quickly. "They will destroy my research. Possibly me. And likely anyone who has made contact, including you." Her words rang with finality. "They cannot allow critical data about cross-species interactions to fall into the wrong hands." A swirl of dread and protective instinct welled inside me. I had just met her, yet I couldn't bear the idea of handing her over to some shadowy cosmic authority. She had come to Earth in the pursuit of knowledge, after all, not conquest or harm. "Then we need to get out of here," I said. "Now." Zyra exhaled shakily. "We must. If you are seen with me, it will be complicated. Yet, I cannot leave you behind, or they will find you." With no time to hesitate, I threw back the covers and swung my legs to the floor. Outside, a strange humming sound made my apartment windows vibrate, like a chopper overhead, though deeper and more sinister. The building's hallway lights flickered. My neighbors, presumably asleep or off on night shifts, had no inkling of the cosmic threat descending upon our humble building. Fear knotted in my gut, but excitement too, for I was about to embark on a journey that would transform me forever. I grabbed a duffel bag from my closet, hastily threw in clothes, a few small possessions. Zyra stood watch near the window, her scanner device flickering with warnings. I noticed her long, delicate fingers trembling. For a fleeting moment, I realized how alone she must feel, stranded on Earth, confronted with hostility from her own kind. The urgency returned, and I yanked open a drawer to retrieve my wallet and phone, ensuring to power off any devices that might track us. In the alley behind the building, I said, trying to strategize. There's a stairwell leading to the basement garage, but it's rarely locked. Zyra nodded, trusting my local knowledge. If we can get to my car, maybe we can drive somewhere out of the city, away from prying eyes, until we can figure this out. Zyra pressed a hidden button on her device, causing the lights in my apartment to flicker and dim for a moment. She explained briefly that it was a type of cloaking pulse that might scramble the enforcer's immediate sensors. It wouldn't last long, but it could buy us time. Thus began our frantic flight. We descended the back stairs, hearts pounding in sync, ducking beneath flickering fluorescent lights that threatened to reveal us at any moment. In the parking garage, my old sedan, rusted fender and all, looked decidedly unremarkable, which was precisely what we needed. We piled in, and my hands shook as I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine coughed, sputtered, and finally roared to life. Our eyes locked in silent determination, and I reversed out into the empty night. As we drove, that ominous humming overhead seemed to persist, though always out of sight. Sometimes, I glanced in the rearview mirror expecting to see some monstrous spacecraft shining lights on us. But the moonlit sky remained deceptively tranquil. Zyra explained that the enforcers often operated in covert stealth craft, invisible to normal detection methods. They'd likely try to corner us, forcing her submission and wiping out any evidence of her presence. The enormity of the situation stirred my sense of self-preservation, but also a surprising protectiveness. In the driver's seat, I forced my mind to remain calm, running through possibilities. My old lab, where I used to conduct genetic research, sat in a remote area near the outskirts of the city. It was no longer in active use, but I still retained a pass to get in, mostly because I occasionally needed to reference archived data. We needed somewhere safe, where we could hide from advanced alien detection. How about we head there? I murmured, and Zyra nodded, leaning back against the seat, relief dancing across her face. As the city's neon lights receded, replaced by dark highways stretching into the distance, Zyra resumed her story. She spoke in hushed tones of her people, the Zayari, who had long studied various civilizations across the stars, but always with a strict policy of non-interference. She had yearned to go deeper, to learn about the emotional tapestry that made humans so unique, so unpredictable, so passionate. Her superiors had warned that direct contact might compromise her objectivity, but she insisted that true understanding required intimacy. I listened, enthralled, glancing at her now and then. My scientific curiosity fought with the reality that we were fleeing for our lives. Still, I asked questions about her biology, gleaning bits of how her body regulated the luminous pigment in her skin, or how her speech patterns could adapt so quickly to human languages. She explained it in fragments, referencing advanced gene therapies that had allowed her species to endure extreme environments. She used words that sparked my intellect, hinting at knowledge that could revolutionize our entire understanding of genetics. And I realized, with an almost exhilarating dread, that she could be the key to breakthroughs I'd never even dreamed possible. We reached the lab compound in the gray pre-dawn hours, our silhouettes blending into the deserted stretch of road. Disused security cameras perched on the building's eaves like silent sentinels. If the enforcers are scanning for me, I can temporarily shield us, Zyra said, fiddling with her device. But we have to be careful about large energy signals. Inside the building, the stale scent of old chemicals clung to the air, and my footsteps echoed across tiled corridors that had once bustled with scientists. Zyra peered around, her eyes bright with fascination. Shelves of equipment lined the walls, some obsolete but still intact. We can stay here for a short while, I told her, flicking on the building's backup power. A dim glow filled the corridor, revealing an old break room and the door to a sub-level storage area. We set up a makeshift camp in an abandoned office, dragging in chairs and hooking up a minimal power line for heat. Exhaustion weighed on both of us, but also that urgent question: how would we evade the enforcers permanently? Zyra stared at her device, tapping out symbols I could not decipher. They are searching, she said quietly, but the cloaking signal I've produced is distorting my location for now. In that quiet sanctuary, a fragile bond began to form between us. We were two exiles, she, an alien on Earth, and I, a scientist who had grown estranged from typical human life. Yet, as dawn broke outside, painting the horizon in soft gold, our flight gave way to an even deeper discovery. Over the next few days, we lived in the lab's dusty corners, forging a routine to keep the building's old systems from drawing undue attention. I gleaned more about her culture and her specific mission. She was determined to write the definitive treatise on humanity's approach to emotional intimacy. While the concept might sound mundane to some, to the Zayari, it was both perplexing and mesmerizing. We humans, she revealed, had a remarkable capacity for forming intense emotional bonds not solely out of reproductive necessity, but from an intangible yearning for companionship and love. I showed her data from my old research, explaining how genetic markers might predispose certain individuals to strong emotional empathy or unique patterns of affection. She listened raptly, comparing these revelations to the emotional spectrum of her own species. She teased out stories from me about past relationships, heartbreak, that persistent ache of loneliness I had felt. At first, I was embarrassed by how personal it all was, but a surprising comfort blossomed between us. Sometimes, she would place a gentle hand on my arm, her luminous gaze filled with understanding, and in those moments, the barrier between our worlds seemed to dissolve. When the tension of our precarious hiding became too much to bear, we ventured out carefully in the dead of night. I took her to deserted fields beneath starlit skies. She marveled at the constellations from this vantage point, her vantage, ironically, having always been from above Earth's atmosphere or from data gleaned on starships. "Your world is so rich with stories," she said, referencing the mythologies behind Orion, Cassiopeia, and more. "My people rarely cling to such elaborate myths. We rely heavily on logic, on science. Yet, your legends seem to fuel your romantic hearts. It's compelling." Thus, we traveled together through half-familiar territory. To me, everything was a reminder of my old routine, but with Zaira at my side, each location sparkled with renewed wonder. While we rummaged through supply closets at the lab, searching for anything that might help us, we discovered more about each other's vulnerabilities. Hers, a fear that she would fail in her mission and be cast out by her superiors. Mine, a creeping doubt that I would ever connect deeply with another soul, human or otherwise. Each day, her research on human romance became less academic and more personal. She observed gestures of affection, like how my voice softened when I asked if she was all right, or how she lightly brushed away a strand of her shimmering hair when I complimented her. I realized, with a slight jolt, that I was falling under her spell. Or perhaps it wasn't a spell at all. Perhaps it was just the undeniable magnetism of two solitary beings forging an unlikely connection. Yet, always, the threat of the enforcers loomed. Sometimes, Zaira's scanner would flash a dire warning, indicating a surge of energy in the atmosphere above. We would cower in the deepest corridors of the lab, hearts pounding, certain that black-clad invaders would crash through the doors at any moment. But they never did. Her cloaking signals still held, or so it seemed. One crisp morning, while I was reviewing old experimental notes by the lab's second-floor windows, Zaira rushed in, breathless. "Ethan," she said in a trembling voice, "I think I may have uncovered something crucial. Something about your genetic makeup. May I discuss it with you?" I glanced over at her, heart uneasy. "What do you mean?" She held out a battered printout, lines of code from my archived genetic data that I had studied over a decade ago. "Your DNA is unique. There are markers here that match sequences we Zayari have studied for centuries, ones that relate to advanced cellular regeneration. It's a gene we have been searching for in countless species, rumored to hold the key to reversing certain degenerative conditions that plague my people." She paused, eyes shining with wonder. "If my analysis is correct, you might hold the puzzle piece we need to eradicate a malignant disease that has haunted the Zayari for generations." My mouth fell open. "That's impossible," I said, though my pulse quickened. "Those are old study results from my personal genome. I thought they were inconclusive." She set the printout aside, stepping nearer. "They may be inconclusive to humans, but with my knowledge of Zayari biology, I can interpret the patterns. Your code suggests an ancestral anomaly, like an evolutionary gift. If harnessed properly, it could help produce a vital serum or gene therapy." Her voice caught, as if the weight of this revelation pressed on her. But we would need advanced equipment and specialized facilities to synthesize it. And we'd need time we may not have, given the Enforcer's pursuit. My thoughts reeled. I recalled half-remembered experiments, fleeting anomalies that I had chalked up to lab errors. To think that my DNA, my lonely, unremarkable self, might offer a lifeline to an alien civilization. It sounded like the stuff of cosmic fairy tales. But the sincerity in Zyra's voice banished my doubts. What exactly do we need? I asked quietly, glancing at the old laboratory equipment, much of which was outdated or broken. Because I'm not sure we can find advanced alien biotech around here. Her brows knitted, an air of urgency in her expression. I can use my field manipulator's capabilities if we can power it fully. But that would create a huge energy signature, basically revealing our location to the Enforcers. And if we fail to shield ourselves, they'll be here in minutes. A surge of determination coursed through me, fueled by an odd blend of protective instinct for Zyra and an innate desire to do something meaningful with my work. Let's do it, I said. We'll find a way to cloak ourselves, even temporarily, while we run your manipulator at full capacity. If it can save your people, then we have to try. We set to work. It was an odd fusion of earthly and extraterrestrial science. My scribbled chemical formulas pinned to corkboards next to her sleek, glowing readouts. Late into the night, we tested a small-scale run of her manipulator, carefully measuring its power draw and calibrating the shield that would mask its energy spike. Each attempt was nerve-wracking, the old lab lights flickering with surges of current, the building's backup generator straining under the load. Twice, we had to abruptly shut it all down to avoid detection, hearts thudding in our chests. And, in those tense hours of labor, our bond deepened. We laughed at the absurdity of it all, a lonely scientist and an exiled anthropologist, working side by side in a dusty old lab to save an alien civilization. We ate stale protein bars by candlelight, whispering about hopes and fears. Sometimes, our eyes would meet for a fraction longer than necessary, and my breath would catch. I found myself reaching out to touch her hand, her glowing skin cool yet electrifying beneath my fingertips, and she would smile in a shy yet eager way that made my heart flutter. On the fifth night, after countless tests and near misses, we decided to attempt the final procedure. If this works, Zyra told me, hooking cables to her manipulator, I'll have a stable sample of your unique gene pattern, which I can replicate into a curative formula for my people. But it requires splicing and resequencing. That might temporarily weaken you. It's worth the risk, I said, though anxiety gnawed at my gut. Better to try than spend the rest of my life regretting it. She gazed at me softly. You are brave, Ethan Grayson. More so than you know. With that, the lab roared to life. Her manipulator emitted a subdued hum that climbed into a shrill whine, the overhead lights flickering in a manic dance. My back arched involuntarily as a wave of energy washed over me, neither painful nor pleasant, a disorienting tide that seemed to probe my very cells. I felt the swirl of data, the unraveling of genetic codes, and then the reweaving under her alien guidance. My vision blurred, my hearing muffled. Somewhere distant, an alarm beeped, indicating an energy spike that dwarfed all previous readings. Suddenly, Zyra's shield generator sputtered. A red glow suffused the apparatus, fracturing the carefully erected cloak. No, she cried, slamming her palm against the controls. The shield is failing. A wave of dread tore through me, but I was locked in place by the ongoing gene extraction. My mind whirred with 1,000 images, half real, half imaginative. Then the building rattled, as if something large had descended onto the roof. Zyra's frantic voice cut through the haze. The Enforcers are here. Ethan, I must protect you. All at once, the doors were blasted off their hinges. Black-armored figures, humanoid yet unnaturally lithe, stormed into the lab, carrying long, cylindrical weapons that pulsed with a cold, silver light. Zyra cried out, raising a shimmering barrier around me, but one of the intruders fired a bolt of energy that shattered her shield. Staggering, I tried to move, but my limbs felt leaden from the manipulator's ongoing process. Zyra positioned herself between me and the intruders, desperation etched into every line of her face. Leave him, she shouted in her native tongue, the guttural syllables echoing off the walls. He has done no harm. One of the enforcers, presumably the leader, retorted in that same alien tongue, voice dripping with icy disdain. Your research violates every principle of non-interference, he said. Surrender or be erased. Despite the terror coursing through me, a thread of defiance sparked in my chest. This woman, this alien scholar, had risked her life for her studies, for the hope of aiding her people. I refused to let her stand alone. Summoning what strength I could, I lurched forward, placing myself at her side. Ethan, Zyra said in alarm, trying to push me behind her. But I stood firm, adrenaline pounding through my veins. You want to destroy her research? I shouted, though I had no certainty they understood my language. She is not an enemy. She only seeks knowledge, knowledge that can help your species. One of the enforcers leveled his weapon at me, but Zyra thrust out her hand, triggering a pulse from her manipulator. The enforcer's device shorted out in a shower of sparks. Enough, hissed the leader, and he advanced on us. At that moment, an unexpected crack of thunder sounded, a side effect of the manipulator's shield trying to reassert itself. In the flickering lights, I saw a chance. I grabbed a nearby metal bar, launching myself at the nearest enforcer, knocking the partially disabled weapon from his hands. The leader swung around, energy swirling, about to deliver a lethal shot. Before he could, Zyra fired a concentrated blast from her own device, striking the enforcer in the chest. He collapsed, stunned but alive, flickers of his armor short-circuiting. With their leader down, the other enforcers wavered, uncertain. The thrumming whine of the manipulator grew to a fever pitch as a swirl of data floated through the air, coalescing into a small, glowing cylinder in Zyra's hands, the synthesized cure. We have it, she gasped, clutching the cylinder. Now leave us be. The enforcers exchanged a calculating look, but one of them managed to muster his weapon, pointing it straight at Zyra. My heart lurched. If the shot fired, it would be fatal. No, I roared, throwing myself between them. A flash of searing light filled my vision. I braced for agony. Instead, a shimmering barrier formed around me, my own body flickering with some leftover resonance from the gene manipulation. It was as if the manipulator had briefly bonded my cells with some of Zyra's protective energies. The shot scattered into a harmless cascade of sparks. Both I and the enforcer stumbled back, stunned. Taking advantage of their shock, Zyra hammered a sequence of codes into her field manipulator. The swirling energies engulfed us, and I felt a wrenching sensation akin to being pulled through a narrow tunnel. The lab, the enforcers, everything dissolved in a haze of color. When my surroundings returned, I realized we stood outside, on a wide hill overlooking the city's twinkling lights. The night air enveloped us, cool and bracing. My lungs heaved, trying to catch breath, and Zyra slumped to her knees beside me, the glowing cylinder clutched to her chest. I managed to teleport us, she whispered. They'll take time to reorient, but we must keep moving. Gently, I helped her stand. Are you all right? I asked, and she nodded, wincing at the strain. Is that the cure? I breathed, eyeing the radiant container in her hands. She nodded again, tears of relief shining in her luminous eyes. Thus began our final flight, weaving through the night. We still heard the distant hum of the enforcer's craft, searching, but apparently, the abrupt teleportation had thrown them off our trail. Our battered bodies and nerves needed rest, yet an urgency propelled us onward. Zyra said that once the cure was safely transmitted to her people, the enforcers would lose their justification for erasing her research, as the knowledge of the gene therapy would already be integrated into Zayari medical databases. But we have to do it off-world, she told me, voice trembling. I must leave Earth and beam it securely to the main council. Our hearts clenched at the thought. We had grown so close in our short time together, forging a bond deeper than any I had known, human or otherwise. But I understood that for her to protect her data, and me, she must make her way back to her star system. I'll help you, I said, though it pained me to imagine her departure. We made our way to a remote desert region, guided by the data in her manipulator. There, perched among craggy hills and barren salt flats, was a place where her escape vessel lay hidden. She had stashed it in orbit, descending by stealth shuttle. By the time we arrived, dawn's first rays were streaking across the horizon, painting the sand in shades of rose and gold. Exhausted, Hearts pounding, we found her small craft concealed in a long-abandoned airfield hangar, draped in shimmering camouflage that flickered away once she keyed the access code. The vessel's smooth, metallic exterior gleamed, doors sliding open with a faint hiss. Zyra paused at the ramp, turning to me with tears shining in her eyes. "Ethan," she whispered, voice thick with emotion, "I cannot begin to thank you for everything you have done. You risked your life, your safety, for me. You gave me more than I ever expected, both in research and in understanding." My throat constricted. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My heart hammered, and I wondered if this was the last time I'd ever see her. She moved closer, resting a gentle hand on my cheek, and I felt the soft, cool glow of her skin against mine. "I want to stay," she confessed, voice trembling. "But my people are counting on me. If I do not deliver this cure, an entire generation could be lost." I covered her hand with mine, that now familiar warmth flooding me. "Go," I managed, swallowing my sorrow. "Do what you must. Save your people. I'll always remember you." Her eyes brimmed with gratitude, and for a fleeting instant, she leaned forward, pressing her forehead to mine in what I assumed was a Zayari gesture of deep affection. Then, slowly, she turned, ascending the ramp. She paused at the threshold. "Perhaps," she said, voice catching, "when it is safe, I will return. If you wish it." I nodded, not trusting my voice, and watched as the hatch sealed. A muffled roar followed, the engines coming to life, and the craft lifted gracefully into the sky, piercing the morning light. I shaded my eyes, a swirl of grief and hope mingling in my chest. In the weeks that followed, I returned to my apartment, though it took time to extricate myself from the labyrinth of confusion around the destroyed lab. Official investigations concluded it was a freak chemical explosion, with no mention of extraterrestrial involvement. I offered no dissent. My old colleagues regarded me with curiosity. Why had I been absent? I offered vague explanations about a personal crisis, though none guessed the truth. For a while, I drifted through the quiet routine of my existence, haunted by dreams of shimmering blue skin and luminous eyes. Sometimes, I felt an uncanny tingle along my arms, recalling that moment when my body manifested Zyra's protective barrier. Part of me feared the enforcers would return, but as the months slipped by, no sign of them appeared. I assumed that Zyra had succeeded. Her people had the cure, and the impetus for the enforcers' pursuit had vanished. And so life went on. I busied myself with renewed research, unearthing new theories in genetics, spurred by the insights I had gleaned from Zyra's data. My papers grew bold, hinting at radical possibilities for advanced gene therapy. Colleagues took note. Some praised my ingenuity, others regarded me skeptically. I accepted both stances with a secret smile, longing for the day when perhaps the universe would be ready to embrace the truth behind my revelations. Then, on a quiet evening months later, as I tinkered with a new data model in my apartment, I heard a soft hum outside my window. The familiar rush of adrenaline kicked in, and I hurried to look out, half expecting a dreaded enforcer craft. Instead, I glimpsed a subtle glow, like a wandering aurora drifting across the sky. My heart leapt. Flinging open the window, I stared up at the star-flecked dome of night, breath bated. A swirl of light descended, gentle and unobtrusive, and in it, I thought I discerned the silhouette of someone slender, graceful. My heart pounded, incredulous. A moment later, a faint knock sounded at my door. She stood there in the hallway, looking just as I remembered, blue skin radiant, eyes wide with anticipation. A small bag was slung over her shoulder. She wore a half-smile, tinged with the trepidation of one uncertain how they would be received. But when I reached for her, I felt a wave of warmth, of belonging. My voice trembled. "You came back." She nodded, tears brimming. "My people are safe," she murmured. "And my superiors have read my thesis, with all its details on the depth and breadth of human romance. They gave me permission to return, if I so wished, albeit under quiet diplomatic conditions." Joy cracked through me like lightning. I drew her into an embrace, my arms folding around her gently. She was both familiar and otherworldly. The corridor lights cast shifting patterns on her glowing skin, and for a moment, I was aware of how extraordinary she was. But in my heart, she felt like home. "I want to learn more," she whispered against my shoulder, voice quivering with tenderness. Not just for research, but for me. About you, about us, about this wondrous, unpredictable, human thing you call love. 1,000 emotions swelled inside me, but I could only answer with a soft laugh, a tear slipping down my cheek. Then stay, I said, voice thick with meaning. We'll figure it out, together. And so, in that quiet hallway, under the hum of flickering lights, we found our imperfect yet heartfelt ending, an ending that was truly a beginning. Side by side, we stepped into the warmth of my apartment, leaving the ghosts of loneliness behind. Our hearts, alien and human, beat in unison, embarking on a new chapter of discovery, romance, and hope under the vast, starry sky. Though our story had been steeped in danger and uncertainty, it ended here, in the simple truth of two souls, more alike than different, choosing to stand by each other. And for that, I will be forever grateful, both for the scientific wonder it brought to my life, and for the promise that, perhaps, some cosmic destinies really are written in the heart's code, waiting only for the bravest among us to unlock them.